Can you fully pay attention to what is happening in the moment?
On the show today, we sit down with Sara Harvey Yao. Sara is the founder of Yao Consulting Group. Sara is the author of 2 great books. One, Drop In, Lead with a Deeper Presence and Courage. And the second one, Get Present, Simple Strategies to Get Out of Your Head and Lead More Powerfully. She's also the host of another podcast called The Whole Leader.
This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Dana Redmond.
Sara, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for us to talk about our topic today, all around stress and burnout, and really how can people recognize that, right? It's just that, I love that, right? That sigh. Can you tell us a little bit about your own personal journey with this?
Oh, yes. I sigh because I remember, and I still struggle with this. I'm a full-time working mother with 2 children at home and a household and a husband and a dog that seems to be more high maintenance than the children. And sometimes I still feel it. I feel being stretched in so many directions. And my real big turning point, or what I refer to now as my wake-up call, happened in 2009. And leading up, it was actually October 2009, but leading up to that, I was, again, still leading a business, doing a lot of speaking, and had huge deliverables at the time. So was a lot of stress happening for me. My oldest son had started in a new school, and there was so much going on at that time in my life that I literally remember driving home from a meeting thinking about, wow, what did I just say? Or my mind would go to, wow, what am I going to say in my next speaking gig? Or, oh, God forbid, what I'm going to wear at the next speaking gig? Or how's my son doing? Or what are we going to have for dinner? I mean, just my mind was constantly spinning. And it felt like morning, noon, and night. My mind was somewhere other than where my body was. And during this whole period of time, I had a kind of a low-grade respiratory illness. I had a cough that just wouldn't go away. And I know I was run down and tired, but it was almost when I tuned into that or kind of felt the physical symptoms, it was almost like immediately the voice in my head said, yeah, well, you don't have a choice. Just power through. You're going to get through this, and you just buck up. And
Right,
it's just,
right.
Just
Gotta
get through it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I know so many of us have that little voice in our heads. And so that's what I did. I just did what I always did, and I just made it happen. And my last speaking event of that period of time was in front of about 1,100 people at Microsoft, and it was right before their CEO at the time was coming on the stage. So it felt like a high-stakes event for me. And foreshadow, the theme of the talk was succeeding without side effects. So this was obviously in my consciousness. And I came home. The speaking gig went fine. And I came home and I literally just crashed. I was just, it's like when it's over and you're like, oh. And then 2 days later, I was I just called myself sick. But then 2 days later, I woke up and went to take a drink of water, and it dribbled down the right side of my face. And then I went to go and touch my face, and I couldn't feel anything. It was like I had,
Wow.
you have Novocaine at the dentist. But my entire right side of my face was completely numb. And, of course, I was in sheer panic. I went to the doctor and found out I had a virus called Bell's palsy, which temporarily paralyzes one side of your face. And I just knew right then. I was like, oh, I just got stopped. My life just said no more. My body said no more. It's like I almost instantly knew right then that my entire way of working and thinking and being in the world was going to go under a massive examination period.
Right.
So I was really sick and really scary when my doctor said sometimes the paralysis doesn't go away. So that was my wake-up call. I took a good 6 to 8 weeks off of work, dove completely deeply into my healing with acupuncture and my naturopath and rest. And luckily, my face did resume and come back to relatively normal in about 3 months. But it sent me on a very different trajectory for my work.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, and that's like a major wake-up call.
Mhm.
I mean, I can only imagine that. As you look back on that, were there signs earlier on that you think you could have recognized before maybe it came as a full-blown
Oh.
impact to you?
These are the things I thought about on the couch for weeks.
Right.
Where did I miss it? And there were so many signs or opportunities or symptoms. One of the first was that I coughed all the time. I mean, my body was giving me
Right.
plenty
Right.
of awareness that something was off. So definitely tuning into your physicality. That is sometimes leads you to examining, and it did for me, examining my thought process. I was so on autopilot at the time when that little voice of like, Sarah, you're not feeling so hot. And again, that other voice coming in and almost just barreling it over and saying, you don't have a choice. That's probably one of the main points I would love listeners to really question when you feel like you don't have a choice.
Mm.
That is a huge red flag that you are running on what I would call autopilot. You are running and operating from what I refer to in my book, Drop In, a conditioned state. You've been conditioned to believe that you have no choice, or that if you stopped and took care of yourself, or that you stopped and took a few breaths, or that you said no to something, that would mean something terrible about you or your career. I talk about it in both books of very different parts of the brain that operate. And when you feel like you don't have a choice, you are operating from your survival part of your brain or your limbic system.
I guess I'd question then what's a problem with that, right? So I mean, I think that as many mid-career professionals, right? We've got a lot. We're sort of that sandwich generation, right? You'll have parents you have to take care of. You've got kids, you've got careers, you've got spouses. You probably have some volunteer opportunities, right? And it does oftentimes feel like if I don't do it, who else is, right? So why is that a bad thing, I guess? In your case, you had a very traumatic and, very large impact, or, it was very, but for other people, do they always have that, or what, sort of what's the bad of that?
Certainly, I know plenty of stories where the big event happened. It's the cancer, it's the death of a loved one, it's some other physical breakdown.
Right.
So that happens. I think if you go long enough, I think that's more apt to happen. But that low grade dissatisfaction, low grade stress, low grade operating from a place that's not inspired, that takes a toll on the system. It takes a toll on your physical system. There's actually plenty of science that points to that continuing pushing through and not really tuning into what's happening for yourself. That takes a toll on your adrenal glands. It takes a toll on that whole stress and nervous system.
Yeah.
And it takes a toll on your soul, which, I might even say is worse. And I think many of us have been conditioned to think that that's a luxury to even think about what is a deeper meaning or deeper sense of my existence about. But when we're just going through the motions and going through the motions, it will chip away at a sense of well-being and okayness.
Right, right. And it's so interesting to, that term you use, sort of that low grade stress. So maybe it's not I'm constantly in front of large groups of people giving talks or whatever, but it's just this constant sense of, wow, there's a lot of pressure on me.
Yeah.
And that can continue to sustain low grade, can continue to have then the problems for physical problems. And as you mentioned, the problems with your soul and sort of deeper down, feeling that satisfaction.
And your career. Right? You are not operating at your best. You are not with that low grade kind of grind. And I think it's interesting in our culture, the language people use, the grind, the hamster wheel. There's a lot of referencing to this low grade, grind. I'll just use that word. I can't come up with a better word right now. A low grade stress or grind. It really does not put you at your best. for your career. So you can start losing touch with what's interesting to you,
Mm-hmm.
what is really where your brilliance is. We get into such a mode of, well, yeah, I can do it. I don't want to do it. It's not the best use of my time, but I can do it. And if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. So we get into a rut. And that, I would say, I've seen a lot of midlife crisis come from a long period of time of not paying attention.
Of just that, right? Just enough autopilot, enough low grade that something then big has to change to make a difference, right? So what are some of the signs you would encourage people to recognize sort of about stress before it becomes that full-blown sort of burnout?
Well, similar, I talk about in my first book several kind of doorways to being present. And I don't think we've really even officially talked about this concept of being present. This idea that I can just tune in to the moment and tune into my body sensations, to my emotions, to my thoughts, like what's actually happening right now. Because when we're on autopilot, like I was in that October of 2009, and I was driving from gig to gig, and my mind was constantly spinning. That is called autopilot. You're not thinking. You're not actually tuning into what's happening. So presence allows you to just create an air pocket, just a tiny little bit of space in your day where you can start questioning and being aware of what's actually happening. Because until you are present, you don't even have a fighting chance to make a different choice.
That's very interesting.
Right? So if we're on autopilot, you're just going.
Yeah. Yep.
There's no space to choose something different. So this is why I talk about presence and why that's so important. And so there's 4 ways that I talk about creating those air pockets, kind of those moments of presence. And the first one is with your schedule. Like when you notice, if you looked at your calendar, anyone right now, myself included, if you looked at your calendar and you are in back to back to back to back meetings, and there's literally no air pocket in your calendar, there's a sign. There's a sign you are going on autopilot. Because it's very difficult unless you got it really well trained to go from one meeting to the next for 8 hours straight without being able to take care of even the biological needs and really stay present. You are on autopilot. The second one is your body. Like when do you have moments to even tune into what do you need physically? Are you able to move your body physically? So many people exercise or movement that brings joy, right? Just that's like not even an option sometimes. And for some people, it's a beautiful way of creating sanity. So check in with your body. How am I doing? Am I hungry? Do I need to use the restroom? Am I thirsty? I mean, when we operate on low blood sugar and dehydration, which most of us do, where our brain power is operating at about 40% less effective, which is, you're not at your best.
No.
When you're just simply hungry or dehydrated.
Right,
just
right.
talking baseline needs or sleep, right? And then another one is checking in with your thoughts. And what am I thinking? Even tuning in, if I would have had the information that I have now back in 2009, I would have asked myself, all right, is it really true that I don't have a choice here? Just questioning some of your internal assumptions, having an air pocket to even notice what your thoughts are is really, really powerful. And then the fourth is tuning in with your heart, tuning into your heart. And what do I need right now? How many of us stop and ask ourselves during the day, what do I need right now? It might be that I need to use the restroom, but it might, that kind of that low grade, as I look back on that time for myself, there was kind of just a low grade sadness too, or just being bummed. It wasn't a full depression, but it was, oh my God, I got to go through this again. I got to get up today again. And so if I would have been able to tune into that, even any one of those 4 places to create an air pocket may help anyone tune into what's actually happening.
Right, right. And I think that's such an interesting word you use there, creating the air pocket, right? I mean, it gives at least for me a sort of a visual of what you need,
It's
right?
a sad visual.
Yes.
getting trapped underwater and you come up for a breath. But sometimes these
Right.
really full lives of people like us is what we need.
Yeah, yeah. And that's incredible. And especially, you mentioned like if you could have recognized any one of those four places that could have given you, that air pocket or that space to be more present, could have been the difference, right, for you. Wonderful. Well, let's take a break. And then when we come back, I want to talk about what if people are already feeling burned out? Maybe they've gone beyond that stress and they're already in that burned out phase.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back. Today we're talking with Sara Harvey Yao about stress and burnout and sort of tips for recognizing that and hopefully helping yourself get through it. So Sara, what can somebody do if they are already feeling burned out? Maybe they've gone beyond that stress level and they are in that full burnout or partial burnout. Like, where can they go from there?
Well, I know this one well too, but I can sort of hear voices in my head. I'm not crazy, but I've worked with so many people that even the people that are in that really crunchy spot of being really stressed out, there's almost like this cynicism that there's no help for them. Like, yeah, whatever. Like I have time to do one more thing. Like I have time to become present. So I wanted to acknowledge that because I think when we get into those really kind of overwhelming spaces, it feels you can almost not see anything but what you're in.
Right, right.
So when someone is in that space of being really stressed or overwhelmed, I always ask, okay, let's go back to fundamentals. Go back to your fundamentals. What are the things that they may be small, but will help you? And it's often those physical things that will help the physical system. So are you getting enough water? Are you eating regularly so your blood sugar is maintained? And are you eating things that's actually going to help you? Or are you on the sugar caffeine cycle? And can you add just a little bit more nutrition and sustenance into your day? Is that just does miracles for how we view things? And can you move your body a little bit? If that's a 10-minute walk at some time, if hopefully you get lunch, or get a little bit of fresh air. And is there a way that you can get to bed 15 minutes earlier? That's all we're asking. Sometimes when that overwhelm is so great, we have to start with the smallest steps to start adding into our fuel tank. So starting with fundamentals is often a really, really good place to start. If you feel like you kind of got that down and you want to do a little bit more, I always just start with presence is something you can do anywhere, anytime. So all it takes is being willing to consciously notice what's happening. I'm not asking you to change it. I'm not asking you to judge it, but just can you notice? Can you fully pay attention to what is happening in the moment? And that could happen in a boring meeting. It could happen at dinner. It could happen when you're in the shower and you just feel the soap on your skin. It could be when you're using the restroom and you simply feel your feet on the ground. It can happen when you're just making eye contact with somebody else. It's just these moments of presence can happen anytime, anywhere. And when you add that in, you might be, I'll venture to say, I think you will be surprised at what that can do to sort of wake you up off of autopilot and change your perspective and your energy level.
That's so interesting to think about that, the piece of being present and how in your career and in your job, if you really had just a little bit more sometimes of being present, or as you talked about, if your body's depleted, just your brain capacity and like your brain functioning is at not its peak spot, and you feel like, gosh, I'm going in for this important meeting, or I want to try to get promoted, so I want to go have this conversation. If I'm not all there because of all these other reasons, I'm not getting enough sleep, or I'm, not eating well, and or I'm just not in the moment, right? I'm actually not there. It's interesting to think about the impact that being present can have through all parts of your career and your job and just your life.
Oh, yeah. And how many of us have stayed up late working on a PowerPoint deck or some sort of presentation? You stayed up late, you didn't get enough sleep, and then you're not at your best the next day because you thought you were preparing. But really, after 9 o'clock, your brain capacity is not that great. And actually, studies show after 4 p.m., your brain capacity and decision making fall dramatically. So is there a way that after 4 p.m. or maybe even after 9 p.m. could be more nourishing for you so that you wake up a bit more clearer and a bit more present? Because you're prepared. It will come to you. If you are fully prepared and present in the moment, not fully prepared, but fully present in the moment, I have heard thousands of comments of people saying, things came out of my mouth. I don't even know where it came from, but dang, it was good.
Right.
You're there. It comes to you. It's a little counter logical from what we've been conditioned to do because it's always about pushing harder. And I'm suggesting, maybe there's a really different way of showing up at your best.
Wow, that is it. It's very different than the way a lot of people would think. You think like, let me stay up late, let me prepare for this. And some of that starts even, when you're in school or in college and you're cramming for tests the night before and you stay up late. Or, I know for a personal experience, many a presentation did get finished at 1 a.m. before I was supposed to present at 8 a.m., right? And it wasn't that I'd procrastinated. It was just that it was, I needed all the time or I was going to use all the time I could. And so to think, wow, stop what you're doing and go to sleep is
crazy.
Yes, yeah.
It's crazy. I understand that. It's crazy. And when I work with clients, we got to ease into it. Some of these things that they end up doing 3-6 months later, they couldn't have imagined they would be doing, like saying no. Whoa.
Yeah, how to say no help my career.
No or saying not yet or not, I can't do that right now, or what else needs to shift. But really putting some boundaries and having a realistic view of their energy and their time is incredibly powerful. But you have to be present to even get to the place of being able to make a choice.
Of knowing that. That's interesting, right? That you have to be present enough to know, gosh, what is it that is possibly having this impact on me? I know I'm not 100%, but what is that piece that I need help with?
And the beautiful thing about presence is that it's our natural state. We came into the world as fully present beings. Now, through our lifetime, we get conditioned to not remember what that felt like. But when we do become really present and we just take even the moments, just the smallest moments to take a breath, to really notice what we're feeling, notice what we're thinking, it triggers something. We're like, oh, that feels good. I remember that. And then you kind of want more. And it builds on itself. The more present you are, the more you're willing to do whatever you need to do to get that feeling.
Right. And then you can keep coming back to get that feeling.
Yeah.
And then if you have a good feeling and then it helps you do well on a presentation or helps you do well in that conversation you needed to have with somebody at work, or, you had that bright idea.
It's a positive or positive cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus that other
right.
downward spiral of Diet Coke and M&Ms at 4.
So do you think there's such a thing as good stress?
That's interesting. No. I think a lot of people would argue with me on that. I think there's inspiration. I think there's passion. I think there's creativity that you can't sleep through. But that's a very different impact on your entire body and nervous system than stress. When stress to me is that it's rooted in fear. It's rooted in that reactivity. And I don't believe that is where we are at our best. I have had times where I felt so dang compelled to keep working. but it was not out of fear. It's like, this stuff's coming. How I wrote Drop In, my second book, was a lot like that. Like, there is inspiration coming through me, and yes, I would like to stop and watch TV, and it's coming. Like, I want to move this through, and it's just a different impact on your system.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about, that there are times when maybe you do want to work later, you want to keep writing that article, or you want to keep brainstorming about that new marketing campaign. But if it's coming from a more positive place, that place of inspiration,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a good thing, as long as it's not
go
that
for it.
like, oh my gosh, my deadline is tomorrow and I'm going to be in trouble if I don't have something and nobody else can do this but me, and that more negative place
Right.
of it.
And if you can stop and even ask yourself, where is this energy coming from? Is this being driven from fear, or fear of lack, or feeling like I need to prove myself, or scarcity in some way?
Right.
Or is this coming from, yeah, no, I really just want to do this? Then that's presence in itself, just being able to question it.
Right, right. And I love that. If you can feel inspired in your job or in your volunteer opportunities, right? If that's where it's driving you, harness that
Yeah.
and go with it.
I think one of the common misconceptions I hear about presence is people really feel like they're going to lose their edge, like they're going to become some I don't know, like dull, non-moving being. They're just going to sit around and ohm the whole time. That's not what we're talking about. What I have found in my own experience is that life keeps moving. It's going to move through you. Just, can you do it in a way that is present, and is a way that's connected and inspired? Again, you may feel that you're going to lose something, and that's just your mind speaking. But in my experience, you often gain way more.
So, do you have any sort of top tips or any recommendations that you give to people to how should they manage their stress? Or is that even the right way to think about it? Maybe, I guess I would ask, is, should people manage their stress, or should they think of it some other way?
I think it sort of depends on where you are. In my book, Drop In, there is a process I take my clients through that I talk about in a few different places, of really questioning the underlying assumptions that are driving the stress. That's, if you're going to, I think it's semantics here, but if you're going to work with it, I would want people to work with their stress, get very curious about what's actually underneath this. And without giving it away too much, most of our stress is really driven out of early conditioning of our life that we received early on in life, and is rooted in fear and reactivity. So if you're going to manage it, I would say use all the tools we've just been talking about. And then if you're brave, question it. Question the heck out of it. And see if you can get to some deeper underlying causes for the stress.
Wow, that's interesting. And I do like that term, to work with my stress, right? Which does give it a different aspect, I think, than manage it. Manage it feels like I should be able to contain it a bit and just live with it, right? But working with it means I can get in there, dig in a little, ask some of those questions. Why do I feel like I need to do this? Or why is that a pressure on me now? Which could lead me to a different path.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I love that. I love that kind of just that different mindset of the work with my stress.
Yeah. It really is being in relationship with it differently.
Right. Right. Do you have any tips? I mean, again, as you know, many mid-career or even early career, we feel so pushed and shoved around. Like, if somebody's sitting there right now listening, thinking, oh my gosh, that's me. Like, I'm feeling stressed. This might be from fear, but I don't even know where to go. How do I do this myself? Like, how do I take that next step? What would you tell somebody? What's like that next step somebody should take if they're starting to feel this and can kind of recognize that they're stressed?
Adding in the moments, those air pockets of presence, is going to be extremely helpful. And there are all sorts of ways of doing that. One of my favorite is just stopping, right? Whenever you're at a stop sign or stop light, or you have a moment where you're waiting in a line or something, if you can think about stopping and just taking a breath and saying, oh, this is my moment for an air pocket of presence, adding more of those in. And then if you want to experiment, and I think it just sort of depending on where people's nervous systems are, really stopping for a minute, 2 minutes, maybe 3 or 5, depending on where you are, and really closing your eyes and giving yourself a moment of stillness and quiet. Our nervous systems are operating so high. And for some people, this would sound like torture. It sounded like torture for me for many, many years. This idea of just stopping and taking some breaths with my eyes closed and being still. But that would be another way, kind of next step. And it sounds so counterlogical to stop when you have so much to do. And I'm saying I think this may be your fastest way to more efficiency, more precision with what you're doing. I can't even tell you how often some brilliant way of doing something came to me in a moment of just being quiet and still. Like, oh, I didn't even think of it. And another question I often ask myself is, how could this be easier? Like, how could this be easier? Well, I could ask for help. I could not do it. I could put in some images in the deck instead of so many words. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we can play with it, but those are some other ways that we just are stopping that autopilot and creating some space to choose something different.
Yeah, that's very interesting as you think about work projects or a problem that you just are kind of keep hitting your head upon at work. You're like, oh my gosh, feel like I can't quite crack this nut or whatever it is. And sometimes, if you just slow down, quiet down, stop thinking about it, that's when you have some of those brilliant moments, right? Like, I mean, I hear people talk about like in the shower, right? Something brilliant will come to them as they're shampooing their hair and they're like, that's the answer to that customer problem I'm having, or that's that, that next thing I need to do on that project. And it sounds like, unconsciously that's what you're doing when you're just washing your hair in your shower. You've given yourself that stillness and quiet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Your brain has stopped for a bit.
Yeah. I kind of think about it like creativity or problem solving or innovation. It wants to land. It's kind of like a bird. Like it wants to come in, right? It wants to land somewhere. But if you're moving so fast and so frenetically, it's got nowhere to come in. So maybe in those 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of silence and stillness, maybe the idea doesn't come in right then, but you've set the stage for it to come in some other way. And maybe that's in the shower or when you're sitting there petting your dog or whatever.
Right. So on that thought of giving yourself some like stillness and quiet, how do you recommend people do that? I mean, do I say every day from 8:05 to 8:10 is my moment of stillness and quiet? Is that like...
That would be such the type A way of doing that. If that would work for you, great. Scheduling it for some people really works. For me, it just gives me another thing to rebel against. So I take that off. And I do it when I set the intention that I want to do that as often as I can, and then I experiment with it. I mean, for me, structure and that accountability is sort of run its course for me. I think for some folks that really works. There are so many apps. I use Insight Timer, and you can set it for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever you want. And it just rings a nice little bell, and I know somebody's counting the time.
Right.
And after however long you want to do that, it rings another bell and you've done that. Headspace is another app a lot of people use. There's so many apps that will support. This is where technology could actually support our presence as opposed to take away from it. So do it, experiment. Do it the way that would feel best for you.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about, an app out there that could just, it's a simple sort of timer like, yep, I'm going to do this. And if you're going so fast or your brain's moving, you're like, okay, somebody else, this thing's going to help me. It's going to tell me when I'm, done being still and quiet. I don't have to continue think like, is my 2 minutes up? Am I up? Am I at 90 seconds or have I done my 120? So I like that. Yeah, using technology where it can aid you in this.
And it can be while you're doing the simplest, activities. Really, Like if you have a pet, when you're sitting there with your pet, can you really notice how their fur feels on your hands? Can you really feel their warmth? Can you look in their eyes? Can you smell them? Or, if you have a child, just those one moment of being still and really letting the moment seep into you. That's presence too. That's stillness.
Yeah, that's incredible. Sarah, this is a fascinating conversation. I feel like I could go on and on
We
with
could.
you about it. Just keep going. But I do want to get to some of the questions that we ask all of our guests here on the Career Q and get
Great.
your take on all of these. So, what was your first job?
Oh, my first job, I was 15 and I wanted to be a salesperson at Mariposa clothing store for our age. Maybe some of you will remember that. But I did. I surprised the heck out of my mom. She couldn't believe it. And I worked in retail.
Wonderful. Is there anything that you still use or that when you reflect back on that you think it was really valuable to you in your career?
That taught me really how to connect with people and how to listen. The more I listened to what somebody wanted, the more I could help them. And then the more I sold. I was a really good salesperson, by the way. But that really connecting at a human level first, because if they like you, they want to spend more time with you, and then really listening what's happening for them. They would mention maybe some, one-off event or something that's coming up. They weren't shopping for that, but because I had that, and of course this is using it to my advantage, but I was able to serve them in deeper ways in that job, and those were the first things I learned.
Right. And that continues to carry through. Even if your job is no longer sales, knowing how to connect with your coworkers or connect with business partners to get things done just helps.
Yeah. Do we connect at a human level first?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think many of us have our faces in our phones and don't really know the people we work with intimately.
Right. Interesting. So have you read or listened to anything recently that you would recommend to others?
I watched a 15-minute video that was fascinating from Simon Sinek, but he was talking about, he's a great author, by the way, talking about how to work with millennials and why this particular generation is challenging for, for them and for anybody that's not in that generation. And what was so interesting is how often it came back to the human element and in many ways reinforced the message of presence, specifically in those times before a meeting starts. Can you put your phone down? Can you not be waiting for the meeting while you're on your phone, but instead make those human connections? And also what millennials want and require from the workplace. It's very different than what maybe I grew up with, maybe different from what you grew up with in our careers. But that was a fascinating video.
Oh, interesting. That sounds incredible. And I love that for you, you heard that message about the personal connection, right? Just speaks to sort of where you've taken your career and your life. So hearing that reinforced, I'm sure, was great. So what would your 90-year-old self say to you if 90-year-old Sarah walked in the door? What do you think she'd say to you?
I think she would just say, just to have a little bit more fun. Just lighten up, lady. It's going to be all right. And yet you're doing a good job. I think I actually ask myself this question as I pretend that I'm going to do a review of my life much later. And, does that make me proud? Does that make me feel like I made tough choices? Am I showing up with courage? Am I facing things and looking at things that I will be proud of later? And I think she would tell me I'm doing pretty good.
That's awesome. That's great, right? To have a 90-year-old Sarah say, nice job.
Yeah, and lighten up, lady.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Sarah, this has been so fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'd love to have you back at some future point and we can talk about being present some more.
Oh, I would love that.
So many places we could take that. So great.
That would be great.
Wonderful. So for all of our listeners, I'd like to tell you, go over to thecareerq.com. There you can see show notes and see more information about Sarah and about stress and burnout. Sarah, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and learn more about you and your books and your consulting business?
My website is got it all. So that's yaoconsulting.com. So YAO consulting.com. And both the books, it's under the books tab, and the whole leader corner is where I have my blogs and podcasts and some free guided audio experiences where I actually just lead you. If you just want someone to guide you in a few minutes of presence, I have a few recordings of those as well.
That sounds incredible. Wonderful. Well, I look forward to talking with you in the future, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the lovely Seattle, Washington.
I think many of us have our faces in our phones.